perfectionism keeps us from working because we don't feel ready. We don't feel like we can do it well enough. We're not, it keeps us stuck, right? But excellence, I feel, is something everyone can reach for. That's something that to me not only fosters creativity and you bringing your best to the moment, but it also encourages exploration, it encourages growth. And it's really, excellence is very faith-based. It's very spirit-based to me to pursue, and you're putting goodness out into the world, you're putting excellence out into the world, you're putting inspiration out into the world. Where perfectionism is more fear-based, ego-based. Like, what if it's not good enough? What are they going to think? What are they, all that stuff that completely blocks creativity.
Welcome to the BoldBrush show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold. Brush. My name is Laura Rangobert, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. For our last episode of the season, we sat down with Michelle Dunaway, a professional fine artist who creates deeply authentic portraits and landscapes, travels internationally to teach workshops and paint, and is passionate about capturing the essence of her subjects through a unique, emotionally resonant artistic approach. She discusses a journey of developing artistic skills while maintaining a unique creative vision, highlighting the need to balance technical proficiency with authentic self-expression. Michelle shares insights from her mentors, particularly Richard Schmid, about pursuing excellence rather than perfectionism, and the value of vulnerability in art. Her artistic process involves careful observation, pre-planning compositions, and leaving space for spontaneous creativity, with a focus on capturing the essence of her subjects. Throughout the conversation, Michelle emphasizes the importance of staying curious, present, and true to oneself, viewing art as a continuous journey of discovery and personal growth. Finally, Michelle tells us about her upcoming workshops, including online sessions and Africa-based workshops, focusing on immersive experiences and cultural integration in art. Welcome, Michelle, to the BoldBrush show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's so nice to spend time talking with you, Laura.
Yeah, you too. I am so excited because we've been trying to put this together for a while, and our lives have just been crazy busy, and it always felt like we missed each other again and again, but here we are, and finally I've got you. I have got you, and we can talk about your gorgeous, gorgeous work and your beautiful life philosophy, and everything about you is just so uplifting that I'm really happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
well, I feel so inspired just looking at you. You look like a moving painting right now.
Aww.
Like you just stepped out of a water house, coming to life with your Renaissance, top in the forest behind you. It's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like that's every girl's dream to be compared to a waterhouse painting. So I really appreciate that. Oh man. But before we discuss all of the wonderful things about painting and your paintings, of course, do you mind telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name is Michelle. I'm an artist. I have been an artist. I think I came into this world being an artist, honestly. I just, was drawing before I could speak. It was just, I was captivated by color and nature and people and their faces and hand movements and things from, pre-verbal. So, yeah, so it's just, I'm so thankful to do this for a profession. I didn't know until I was, older and, maybe in my late 20s that you could really do this as a profession, fine art. And it's just been such a joy, so I feel like I'm living my dream every day, just traveling to different places. We're talking about traveling a little bit and getting to know people in different locations and painting the people and the landscapes of different regions. It's just, yeah, I'm just thankful every day to do that.
Yes, it's a dream come true. And actually, since you mentioned travel, I remember the first time we met, because you and I met in person when you were doing a workshop in Florence, Italy.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, a few years ago. Oh, gosh, time flies. So it's awesome.
I think that
also,
was that 2019? That was so
yeah, it was like 2018. Yeah, because that's the year that I left Italy. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, gosh, crazy. But that's what's beautiful too. Like you just said, about this career. It's very, if it, if you make it work out and you put in the discipline and the love, which you definitely have. You have these opportunities that open up. You get flexibility in terms of travel and in terms of the paintings that you make, right? You get to make the paintings you love. And that's
Yes, and I mean,
yes.
that is something that was, hard won over the years because, when you're starting out, you're just trying to make a living and you're trying to learn to be a better painter. So, you're just painting as much as possible just to get the skill to do the things that you've always wanted to do, those paintings that, we all have as artists that are in the back of our mind that we want to bring to life. And, and we do any kind of job to support that really when we're starting out. And it's that balancing act when you're starting out of not having as much time to do what you want to do, but trying to hone your skills and, survive in the world as well. And I'm so thankful to get to a place where, yeah, I can paint what moves my heart. And I think that's what we always have to keep at the forefront of, like, why we're learning the skill, you know?
Yeah, and that's something that I think, personally, because when I studied at the atelier, it's really easy to lose sight of it
It
when you're
is.
learning the techniques, because it is so enticing and beautiful and wonderful to learn academic techniques, because they're so like they're so gratifying, right? It's like I get from point A to point B, but then suddenly you leave and it's like, wait, what was I trying to do? And like, why did I go again? I now all I know is academic stuff, and that's fine. And some people really love it and they continue in it and they do a beautiful job. But then, there's some of us like me who are like, this was for another reason, and I need to give myself that time to like experiment and figure it out more because now I have the skill. Now it's like, okay, now it's the what. What can I do
Yeah.
with
And
this?
that's beautifully said. And I think that, you know, story that was, my story as well. And I really think that's pretty much everyone's, it's like we have something in us that we want to say. We're responding to something in the world that we want to flesh out on canvas. And so that's why we spend time drawing because, most of us drew when we were kids or adolescents, and we weren't doing it to be well known or to sell it or to be in a gallery show. There was no ego involved in it. In other words, it was all about just this pure kind of almost very spiritual to me of just like creating and wanting to create something and bring it into existence like magic, right? And and so then we, get motivated to go to art school and we get motivated to learn an anatomy if you want to do portraits or get out and paint from life if you want to do landscapes. And I do remember going through the same thing you just described, where it's like going to art school and you're painting, 8 hours a day or drawing 8 hours a day just to get it accurate, and then feeling slightly, I wouldn't say disillusioned, but slightly like off when I got out. Like, wait, what was I what was I doing this for? Because I don't want to just keep doing an anatomical study from life. I want there to be emotion. I want it to say something about how I see the world and how I intake and am inspired by life around me. And so I often tell students in my classes that I feel like, it is important for us to learn our ABCs, right? But then the equivalent with art, then you go write your novel. And so with art, it's like we learn our techniques, but we learn it so that we can then say something about what we're experiencing in life. We write, paint our visual novel. And I always feel like paintings can either be a poem, a short story, or a novel, and all of those are valid, you know. And it's so important to remember the why we want to do it, and what do we want to say, because and there's this beautiful quote by Martha Graham, the choreographer, and I can't recite it verbatim, but I've had it in my studio a long time. But the gist of it is like, there's only one of you in this world, and your viewpoint is unique. And if you don't say what you're wanting to say through your art, no one else is going to say it. So, like, have the courage to say it or express it in whatever medium, painting, music, writing, whatever.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, absolutely. It's so, and I love how you compared it to magic, right? Because it does feel like magic. It does feel like,
It
there's
does.
this vision that we're carrying within us individually that we really want to put out there because it might resonate with our people, right? The people who say, "Oh my gosh, that looks like a dream I had," or "Oh my gosh, that reminds me of my childhood." And it reminds us that, there is a connection within all of us as humans, through these images and through these, like you said, like these visual poems or visual novels that we put out there, and it just unites us in its beauty and its expression, which is, I think also why you started doing this career too.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I still love, I mean, you can see the painting I did of Richard in the back. I
Mhm.
still love to leave some abstraction, to leave some, empty space in a painting. And for several reasons, just to kind of take what we're talking about and apply it technically, right? Is that we want to leave space for the viewer to come in and fill in some of their own experience and bring some of themselves to the process of like seeing the work. And I also just on a technical, like nerdy technical standpoint of an artist is like, um, I like to see a little bit of each part of the process in the finished work. I love Michelangelo's finished work, but I love his sketches that you can see those, piantamante lines, those, approximations of finding the form. And I think that's just as, it's part of the journey. And I think the journey is such the most beautiful thing to see in a work of art or a painting or any art form.
Yeah, totally, totally. And that reminds me of a quote that I like, which is the journey is the destination.
Yes, yes,
Because that, once again, it's the act of creation, it's the act of, the development of something, and not necessarily all of it having to be brought to a finish, because like you said, you got to leave a little mystery, there
yeah,
has to be a little something in there that keeps the viewer also looking, because I think that's where I think a lot of like beautiful academic student works differ from like a professional artist's work, is that the I feel like the academic work is finished. It's beautiful, it's polished, it's
yeah,
it's like, wow, this is a complete image, but there's no mystery left because it's all been deciphered for you.
yeah,
But then in like, a painter who has reached a higher level, they still, they'll understand, okay, yeah, it's important to have the basic information for your viewer, but you also want to have that abstraction and that eye candy, that mystery, that lack of total completion, because I think that also brings the viewer into this world of, what is that? I would just want to keep looking at that, you know?
yeah. And part of it, I feel like, is with an advanced artist or professional artist. Part of it is allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the process of creating, and that power within vulnerability, because I think as a novice we don't want to show our vulnerability, not just as artists but as people a lot of times. And as we grow and mature just in wisdom, we realize that there is power in that vulnerability, and everyone wants the permission to allow that within themselves. And so, rather than just creating a portrait that's an analytical representation of the person in front of you, to think about, yes, it's important to get their likeness if we're wanting to, really portray this particular person, but it's also important to, it's a partly a self-portrait of how we're seeing the world at that moment. And it's also a portrait of our connection with that person. So I always think of it as like a threefold kind of trinity thing. It's like of the person, of yourself, of the moment, of you connecting with the person, and our, commonality as human beings coming together to create a work of art. And that's like, it always strikes me when I'm painting that this moment in time with this model or this subject will never exist again. It will never exist in exactly this form again, even if you paint them again in future. It's just, it's, and that's so beautiful. And that is part of that mystery that is life and creativity. And I think when we allow that in ourselves, which keeps us sometimes from overworking a piece, painting too much. We're sensitive more to our intention and the emotion we want to convey, the sensitivities we want to convey, the thing we want to capture and say the most. Then it allows not just the subject, but the viewer also of the work to tap into their own sensitivities and vulnerabilities, and it kind of makes me think there's another quote I love by Mozart, that the music isn't just in the notes, but in the silence in between. And we know, like,
Um,
and I know you're a musician too, and that it's not just about playing a piano concerto perfectly and getting every note perfect. It's the way the notes are played, the emotion that's conveyed, the pausing, the timing, all of that adds to it. And I think that equates to painting like the empty spaces, the transitions, the edges, things like that.
Totally. Totally. Yes. Oh man, it's so true. And I think that's how that it's a totally different level from, yeah, I'm just gonna draw this thing exactly as it is. Like that's like for anyone out there who's like, now what? That's the next step. It's that silence between the notes. And what you just said also about, every moment is totally new. Every sunrise is different, every painting is different. Every time you mix, new paint, it is totally different paint from the one you made yesterday. Even though it could be
Yes,
the
yes.
same exact color. It reminds me of the quote that you never step into the same river twice.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, it's
Love
it's
that.
from an ancient Greek philosopher. I love that quote. Because it's true. You don't step in the same exact spot with the same exact part of the river that touches you, right? So that's every moment
Yes.
is totally new. And
That's so
painting
true.
is
Just the other night, I was out
Mhm.
just marveling. I mean, I live in New Mexico and we have, it's
Mhm.
called the land of enchantment because we have the most incredible skies and sunsets. And I ran out actually in my pajamas because the sun's not setting until like almost 9 o'clock. And so I was
Mhm.
like, ran out, jumped in my car, went to the field near my house and just was photographing and just taking in the sky because, in all my years, I was like, I've never seen a sky exactly like this before. I've never seen colors exactly like this before. And it's just new. And I feel like that's actually a segue. I know you wanted to ask me about
Oh.
that certain quote of genius's childhood recovered at will by
Mhm.
Baudelaire, which is one of my favorite quotes. Segues into that because I think as artists and just human beings, it's part of our job in a way to see things as new every day and not become desensitized to life. And I think that's one of the reasons I love that quote and it's hung in my studio for, a very long time is that when I was starting out, I was a preschool teacher and then I was doing art in the evenings and I loved spending time with the kids. And I would just, I was not an accredited teacher, so I was the break person. So I took the kids out to recess. I did art with them. I did things while the teachers took their breaks. And so I was with all age groups from age 3 to age 13. And through this preschool and elementary school. And what I marveled at is that children, even in the same playground, even in the same environment that they'd go out into every day, they saw everything as new. Every day was something new to discover. And it just showed me that that's what that means to be as little children. Spiritually, it's also that quote, genius's childhood recovered at will, is that at will we bring forth that discovery, that ability to look at things as if for the first time and we put it into our art, you know
Oh,
and
yes,
that
and
and that
that's
is where our genius lies because sometimes after art school we get in I think everybody that's probably listening to this has been in this situation, as I know I have and I'm sure you have, where you're like, I have this idea of something I want to paint, but I haven't really seen that done before, so it's probably not a good idea. And it's like, no, you have a unique set of sensitivities and that idea is coming to you because it's meant to come through you in a painting. And I think we have to be so attuned to that. And that's like, that right there to me is the bridge from becoming a student to a professional. Although I feel like we're always students in the way of like, we should always be learning. Like Michelangelo said, like in his 70s, I'm still learning. But going into the professional realm where you are painting your ideas and your sensitivities and you're trying to share that with the world and you're not just copying, right? And you're expressing, and that's like a subtle difference. But someone who's in that stage, and what I wish someone had told me, because it took me a while to figure that out, was just at that stage when you have the skill is just go back to noticing what catches your breath, what makes you pause and stop in a moment in life and go, wow, that's visually beautiful, or this is a moment I want to capture and paint. And I know sometimes I'll even be with friends or other artists where they may not be responding to the same thing I'm responding to, but we have to become very sensitive and aware of those moments that we respond to. And that's kind of giving you clues as to maybe what your future paintings will be.
Yeah, and I think also that sensitivity is so important to build as well, because I think a lot of us think, oh, but I don't know. And it's like, okay, uh, pause and get off the internet for like a
Yeah,
few days.
exactly.
Because it's so easy. And this, again, from my experience, it's so easy to fall in love with other people's view of something, right? It's super easy because the way that they express it is beautiful, because what they're putting out there is beautiful, but that isn't always your vision, right? It's like you have to remember also to, like, if you see the world with your own filter, and to like remove filters that aren't yours, right? If it's not like, oh, it's like, if I want to paint like a person, right? If I want to make a master copy, I'm borrowing their vision, right? But
Yes.
then to make my own work, I have to remember to not use someone else's vision. Like, yeah,
Yes.
okay, I could take from, different artists that I've learned from, and I can,
Yeah, it can be a
figure out
jumping
like,
off point. Yeah.
exactly. And then you go from there. And that really brings back what you said earlier too about like after you go to like academic school, or you learn technique, it's like, okay, this is the moment where I need to give myself space and time to develop,
Yes.
like, I don't know, like letting bread dough rise before
No,
making a
it's
good loaf
it's
of
true.
bread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the more you listen to your instincts, and this is true in life as much as in art, the more you listen to it and follow it, the clearer that voice becomes, you know?
Yep. Yeah, it's like a muscle.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. That's a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, you just gotta start working it out. It's gonna be a little hard at first, but it'll get easier and easier before you know it. And actually, I wanted to ask you too, because I'm really curious. Because you mentioned it, in your late 20s is when you realized, oh my gosh, I can make a career out of this.
Yeah.
Which, that's actually
I
kind of
knew
two
before you could
questions.
do illustration, you know?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought when I was going to school and went to Art Center College of Design, and I was focusing on illustration, but I didn't realize like fine art was something that at that time people could, segue into. So
Mhm, mhm. So
I was
that
used to seeing
moment for
fine art more in
you.
museums, as past
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, well, they're dead and no one does it anymore.
Yeah.
That's also the thought I had until, I was in high school and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this would be nice, but I don't know. And then, of course, we
Yeah. And
decide
at
to
the
actually
time,
pursue
like
it.
I was in art school is, that was kind of a belief at that
Mhm.
time. Everything was focused on illustration. And
Yeah.
thankfully it's not the case anymore. There's been such a huge resurgence of fine art. And I think
Yes.
it's just always something. I mean, looking at the beautiful painting behind you, how many people have painted trees throughout the centuries, but there's always a new and beautiful way to portray it. So
Mhm. Yeah, and it's that person's unique vision. And speaking of unique visions, because I know that, you studied with Richard Schmid, of course.
yeah.
I want to know what, in part, what was that like for you? And then also, when you had that aha moments of, I can pursue this as a career,
Yeah.
what led you to decide to study with Richard, or how was that for you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's like when I first discovered Richard's work through Alla Prima, which, seeing that book, um, it was very profound. And I shared with him this story that, I would, I was already painting in the way of like doing vignettes and seeing abstraction versus realism is kind of how I naturally saw life. And for me, I've never wanted to paint a particular style in a contrived way. I've always wanted to paint authentically how I'm viewing life. And when I'm inspired by a person, I see an individual, I do zero in the focus on their face in my mind and see everything else as abstraction, because it's just kind of how the human eye sees when we see something that draws our interest. And so I really wanted to paint that way. And I remember going to school, and it was like I was in an illustration program, and I was dissuaded constantly that from teachers that to paint that way. They were like, it needs to be finished out to the edges. The person needs to be in an action pose. Something needs to be happening. And they were coming from that standpoint, of that field. And I was very young, I was like 20 when I was there in art school, and 19, 20. And so I was like, oh, well, they probably know better than me. But this was what was authentic to me when I sketched, when I was on the phone or doodling. I would sketch an eye and then have it go off into abstraction. It's just how I intook the world. And I'll never forget when I was taking a break from art school to save some money, and I was about 20, 21, and I was teaching a figure drawing class at a local school in New Mexico. And there was this book sitting on the table, and it was the new book that had come out, and it was Alla Prima. And as I flipped through it, I saw someone who was painting the way I desired to paint, but was told not to. I saw these vignettes, and I remember after I got to know Richard, he talked about how he did get pushback from galleries saying, well, it's not finished out to the edges. We need to be able to charge for this square inch of blank canvas, things like ridiculous things like that he said. Um, but I saw someone that listened to his own voice when I looked through the images. And it gave me permission at that age to listen to my own voice over the older, more established teachers that were giving me, their best advice, but it was not what was correct for me. And I even tell students that I teach, I'm like, I'm going to give you advice, but you always have to weigh it upon yourself what is in accordance or in alignment with your desires as an artist, right? Because I can just share from my experience, but everyone I think is like, yes, we are an accumulation of knowledge from all of those that have come before us, but then we also have something new to share, and we need to be sensitive to both. And so that really just transformed my painting. And when I went back to art school and started going through the painting program, I left soon afterwards and didn't finish, um, for various reasons. But one of the reasons is I realized I just wanted to take some workshops. I wanted to study. I knew what I wanted to learn at that point. And, I wish, at that stage, I could have just been like, oh, I want to study with Richard Schmid and go study with him. He wasn't teaching workshops. Um, he did teach one with Burton Silverman. It was in Colorado. And I remember being 22 and I just couldn't afford to do it. And I was like, I'll catch the next one. He never taught another workshop. That was his last one that he taught as an official workshop. And so that taught me at that age, when you see an opportunity to learn, you jump on it because you never know. And I've had students say to me, oh, I'll do your, Africa one next year. I'm like, well, I don't know if I'll be doing, I just don't know. Life changes and ebbs and flows, as we were talking about. Um, but I will always find a way to teach in some capacity. But to circle back to your main question with Richard, it was always a dream, of course, to study and learn from him. And, I'm so thankful, as so many artists are, that he put that wealth of knowledge in Alla Prima, and so generous and so open and vulnerable with everything that he shared. And it just, you know, as much as he loved painting, I also realized becoming good friends with him since between 2010 and when he passed in 2021, and spending a lot of time with him, um, that teaching to me was really one of his first loves. Like he wanted to pass on knowledge. He wanted to share things. He had this belief that one person's success, it can be everyone's success. It's like we're here to lift each other up. We're here to like illuminate life. Doing great art is not about ego. It's not about elevating yourself as an artist. And it's about elevating life, elevating creation, elevating the model, elevating that beauty, so that we all come away being reminded that we live in this stupendous universe. And so as I got to know him over the years, that was just such an incredible blessing to paint with him. And it just even solidified the why for me that I'm doing it. Because he, would always say, and it's written in his book, don't paint what you see, paint what you see, paint what moves you. And that it is a communion between your model and yourself in a way. Um, but how that happened with me ending up studying with him, of course, I dreamed of it like many people, would dream of it. And then when I was at a conference, I wasn't teaching at the conference, but I was at the first weekend with the masters, um, and I met him and I met some other artists there. And he said, oh, well, love to see your work sometime. And we just, got along. And I met his wife, Nancy Guzik, who's an amazing artist. And then shortly after that, a few months after that, I entered the Portrait Society with a portrait they got in as finalist, the double portrait of Jane Seymour's daughters. And it was, it was such a thrill to enter that and get in. I actually was not aware at the time, thankfully, that it was such a big competition, like the Academy Awards of portrait painting. So I kind of naively, my friend Jeremy, I was painting at his studio and he's like, you should enter that. And I was like, okay, I'll enter this. And, I hadn't been to it yet. So I was just like, when they called me and said I got in, I was like, oh, thank you. And the person at the time, it was Gordon Whitmore, the chairman, was like, no, you don't understand. We had like 4 or 5 thousand worldwide entries and we picked 16. And I was like, oh, thank you. I didn't realize. And I might have been scared to enter if I had realized, and now I realize like you just have to feel the fear and do it anyway, and enter stuff. And when my painting was a finalist, they put them online and they put the finalists in magazines. And I got a call from Richard Schmid. And I recognized his voice because I'd watched his, videos and everything and so much. And I had met him in person. And he called me up and he invited me to come paint with him. And he still, of course, wasn't teaching workshops or teaching regularly, but he's like, come up and paint with me and my wife, Nancy. And he just said the most wonderful things about my work and the skill he thought I had. And it was a dream. And, I went up there and we just connected, me and him and his wife, Nancy. We just became fast friends. And, they are like family. Nancy's one of my closest friends. And and Richard and I, even talked during the pandemic until he passed away, and often on Zoom and stuff. And one funny little story, and I did tell Richard this, after I'd known him a couple of years, I said, when you called me, I was with my mom in the hospital, and it was the first time she had been in the hospital since she had given birth to me. And they were going to maybe need to do a surgery. She was like had an infection from taking a medication, and when I got the phone call, I didn't check the caller ID. I just assumed it was my dad. So I put it on speaker and I said, hello. And Richard said, is this Michelle Dunaway? And he said it in his voice. And he goes, this is Richard Schmid. Now, I had made my mom ad nauseum watch videos with me every time I was home from college. I'd be like, watch this art video because she's into art. My dad's an engineer, but my mom is a painter. And she would watch it. So she knew his voice. So I looked at her as I'm, trying to sound very professional and calm, like, oh, hi. Wow, you're calling me. Oh, thank you for what you're saying about my painting. I'm trying to like be very calm and my mom's going like she's just jumping up and down practically, so excited because she knows what this means to me. Long story short, after that phone call, my mom's infection went away. She didn't need surgery. And so I said, Richard, you healed my mother. You didn't just change my life, but you healed my mother, and he laughed and he's like, the power of art. So,
Oh man,
sorry,
that's
long answer to
adorable.
your question.
Oh no, but that's great. I love hearing, anecdotes like this because, oh, he was so precious. And then I've only ever heard stories about him and I didn't get the chance to meet him, but he sounds more and more like a really precious person.
He is. Both him and
Yeah.
Nancy are just such special people, and they had such a grace. I mean, she does as well. She's, doing her art, with how they work with a model and how they go about, they don't just create art, but they live their lives as art. And that's, I feel, something that, we all should kind of feel called or challenged to do, that painting is a reflection of the way we live our lives. It's not something we just do and try to get. And I always try to instill that in students when we're working with a model, because of course there's something in us, especially when we're painting and something's not turning out and we get frustrated and we're trying to capture it. We just want it so bad. But I feel like we have to look with softer eyes and be like, not be focused on what can I get? What can I get in my painting? But be focused kind of on what can I give through my painting, you're giving the model this experience of working with them. You're also giving yourself the experience of really paying attention to life, really dissecting everything like a puzzle to figure out how to implement it with brushstrokes, pigment, drawing, and edges and values, And when we see it like that, we do become kind of like little children and our genius comes out to play because we're seeing it as a game or a puzzle or like a brain teaser rather than something that we have to own or get or capture, And it's a very subtle shift in perception, but it makes a huge difference in the painting process. And I do remember once, one of the first times I was painting with Nancy, and we'd set up a model with still life elements. And Nancy does beautiful still lifes with teacups and different things. And I had kind of never done that. And there were teacups and things, plates and antiques behind this model. And I'm thinking, I don't know how to paint this because I've never painted it, right? But we're always painting stuff we've never known how to paint. And she came over to offer me advice, and she could tell I was stuck. I was just in my head spinning. And she said, don't worry if you don't know all the answers or the solutions. Fall in love with asking yourself the questions that lead to those answers. And that just, so I remember that because as a kid, I loved doing like mazes, puzzles, any kind of like, those kind of exploratory kind of games. So now that's how I see his paintings, because I'm challenging myself, especially recently, to do paintings I've never done, paintings in Africa, wildlife, different things. There's even just different techniques I want to do in portrait paintings and uses of color and atmospheric effects and things like that. But I see it now as like, okay, it's this beautiful quest that you're going on. It's this beautiful exploration, and you figure it out as you go, like the journey, it's the journey part.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, that is so inspiring. Just, and again, like that really brings to mind how you describe Nancy as someone with a lot of grace. And I think that's a quality that I think a lot of people don't have enough of for themselves. Having grace for
Yes.
yourself, right? Having that grace of like, I don't have all the answers, but that's okay. I'm not going to punish myself because that means that that's my starting point, right? I can just explore until I can reach maybe another question that leads to maybe another question, and then eventually maybe have some sort of answer because
Yeah.
it's I love how you described it kind of like a puzzle, right? Because that really is every single time you approach a painting, it's a puzzle that has to be solved in some way or
Yeah.
has to have some solution. It's okay for it to not be fully solved.
Or even you can say, just be explored. Explore
Yes.
this puzzle in your work. And if it doesn't turn out on the painting, wipe it out and do it again and
Yep.
explore a different path. And you definitely solutions come, and that's where you do figure out solutions to your painting. But I think that's such an important thing that you brought up, that we need to offer ourselves that grace and that kindness. And that's honestly what I'm always reminding students of. And I had to learn that for myself. And it was a very kind of hard learning process for me, because I was harder on myself than I would ever be on another person. I was like, I call myself like a recovered perfectionist, or like, because it's like being an overachiever, being, a perfectionist, as most artists are. Um, that leads to frustration. That doesn't lead to excellence. And I'm not saying don't set out great achievements, but we need to be kind to ourselves in the process, and look at things gently, because then we can explore, then we, ask questions that are intelligent of ourselves, of our process throughout the process of painting. And we find solutions that just, we then add to like our knowledge and repertoire of techniques that we can use at any future time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think also that brings it back to the quote about, the genius's childhood recovered at will. And I think I would add to that that it's also recovered in with grace, because there's nothing more sad than a child who shies away from drawing or from expressing themselves out of fear of judgment or fear and shame, right? And
Yeah,
I
and that's
find that a lot of
definitely
us
a
do that.
learned thing.
It is, it's a learned thing.
Because when I worked at the daycare, I didn't see it in kids until they hit maybe 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could tell it was input from adults, or someone else, that they started to doubt themselves. But kids 3, 4, and 5, I didn't see that in them.
Yep. So it's, I think, in part, it's like going back to being that 6, 7 year old who has just been told, oh, that's terrible, or oh, why are you drawing that? Stop doing that. It's like you have to, give yourself the grace, like, why not? I want to do it. And you have to be a little stubborn, right? I feel like
Yeah.
when you mentioned earlier, like, you gotta stick to your vision a little bit more. It's like you gotta be stubborn, you
Yeah.
know? For that 6, 7 year old you who was maybe told no, 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 it's like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I get a lot of students that say, wow, I got stuck when someone told me that I shouldn't do something at a certain age, whether it was young adult or even older, or as children. And part of our process of creating art is breaking that within ourselves. For me as a teacher, it's helping other people break through that too. Because it's the beautiful thing is we're all like, different crayons in the crayons box, so to speak. We all like see life differently and with unique angles. At the same time, though, we also have this commonality of humanity that is all shared. And that's what connects us, and how we connect through our vulnerability, through our authenticity, through our art, through our creativity, why we're moved by certain pieces of music or paintings or, anything. And so I always find it's what I love about portraiture, that we're this mix of, underneath our skin, we're so similar. We all kind of want to love and be loved. We want to be inspired. We want to do meaningful work. We want to have joyful moments. We all have struggles we overcome. And we're familiar with the overcoming of those struggles and learning to listen to our intuition, all these things that make us human, right? But then, on the other side is none of us really look alike, even twins, like we don't look exactly alike. We don't have the exact same life experience. We don't have the exact same sensitivities. We all have this very unique lens that, and a unique way to express what we've intake through that lens. And so we're as unique as snowflakes, but we are all connected. And it's like that just always kind of gives me goosebumps to think about. And I think about it every time I paint another human being, and so, as much as we realize we're connected, we do have to realize, and it's hard to realize at 7 years old, that it's okay to see the world differently. And it's okay to have a unique viewpoint, and different viewpoints. One's not better than the other necessarily. They're both valid and important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a dialogue. And it doesn't help to cut off your own dialogue for the sake of someone else's, overpowering it, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And also speaking of being stuck, have you ever faced artist block or burnout? And how have you personally overcome that?
So I honestly have never had artist block, like a creative block.
Mhm.
I have so many ideas that I want to paint. It could feel like 4 or 5 lifetimes. Like really, like I just, sometimes start to worry, like, am I going to get everything done that I wanted to do? Because, you know, and I'm sure you might be familiar with this or other people, is that there are things that I wanted to paint last year that I ran out of time painting.
Mhm.
But now I'm having new experiences. So there's new things I'm wanting to paint. At the same time, there's old things that I still want to paint. And, I have this backlog of like, that I even have reference for of, hundreds of paintings that I'd like to paint. But I'm also having new experiences and getting new ideas. And so that's something, and I think that just comes with being attentive to life, right? If you're attentive to life, I just feel like I've also never been bored or never felt lonely. It just like there's just so much to absorb. I hate to go to sleep. I hate to miss anything. I just, even ever since I was a child, I did have the burnout after art school, but that was because I kind of had lost sight of my why for a little while. I got so into the mechanics of it that I lost sight of bringing myself to it. And I think that's the thing is, and both parts are important, right? It's important to learn that technique, the mechanics, but it's so important to get in touch with ourselves and like know thyself, that adage that, um, what do I want to say with this skill that I've accumulated? What's important to me to say? And, that can vacillate day to day. Sometimes it's important to me just to catch a bit of light on the landscape or across someone's face, or capture an introspective moment, like the painting behind me. Or sometimes it's important to like show a scene or show a person in an environment or show something of their life. And so it depends on what I'm responding to and inspired by in life. And so I think the biggest thing, if someone is out there facing artist block, or it's getting in touch with your own sensitivities. I think we get blocked in different areas in life when we start trying to think how someone else would do it, how to be successful like someone else, rather than thinking, what is authentic to me and what moves my spirit? And when we do that, I feel like the ideas just free flow. Like, I told you in art school, how they didn't really dissuaded me, tried to, dissuade me from doing vignettes. They also tried to dissuade me from painting someone in an introspective moment. They were like, it should be an action. What always interested me when I watched movies, even like an action movie, like let's say the movie Gladiator, for example, right? And I love the action scenes, and we're into, as we've talked, we're into some of that stuff and historic, Um, but I love the moments when you see a character before, after a battle, the reflectiveness, the emotions that pass through someone's eyes before the story's told or after the main event. And it's what also fascinates me when I'm sitting and talking to a friend, having coffee, and they're telling me something that's important, and I'm listening to that, but also to see the emotions that come across their eyes and their expressions and their micro expressions before they allow themselves to be vulnerable to share that, or after. Those are the things that have always captivated me ever since I can remember. And that is what I now paint. But it took me a while to realize, to listen to that in myself, that that's what moves me. And I can appreciate a painting of, someone in an action scene, when I see paintings in Italy or at the Uffizi where it's like this big grandiose narrative. But the thing that captures me the most is the journey of emotion that a human goes through in their life. And so, being aware of that helped me to then be sensitive to what I was seeing and have ideas for painting, and have countless ideas for paintings, because I'm always interacting with humans and observing them. And now I'm experiencing that with animals, when I go to Africa, seeing them go through those same kind of things, even though it's a different species, and it's incredible. So I think, just if anyone out there is suffering any kind of burnout or block, sit with yourself, journal, spend time in nature, just sit with your thoughts and think about, observe and be attentive to what moves you. And, just to circle back to one other thing you said, which I think this is an important point I heard someone talk about, as we get so preoccupied, when you said put down your phone, I heard someone lecturing, and I can't remember his name, but he was saying about how he and his friends decided to, unless there was an emergency, they had to put away their phones when they're at dinner, don't have them on the table. And one of the things he talked about is the tendency we have, say, if you are at dinner with friends, and they get up to go to the bathroom or whatever, you're alone at the table. The tendency is to flip out your phone, check your email, check your Instagram, and what we forget, and what this gentleman said is, what we forget is those quiet moments where we observe the world around us, when we're not even talking to another person, but we're intaking, we're observing, we're listening. Those are where we get our greatest creative ideas. And so I've forced myself to, like, unless there's something urgent that I need to look at, if you have kids or you're taking care of someone, that's different. But unless there's something urgent, if I'm alone, I'm not going to pick up my phone and scroll. I set a limit of that. And I'm going to observe people interacting. I'm going to observe their facial expressions as they talk to each other. I'm going to observe, how the trees are moving, how the wildlife is, whether it's birds if you're in a city or somewhere else, just how people intersect with nature and with each other. And that's where I get my countless ideas from. And we have to discipline ourselves with that, because the phone's a great tool, internet's a great tool. We wouldn't be here talking if it didn't in existence. But we have to discipline ourselves to just be quiet inwardly and absorb and take in life around us.
If you've been enjoying the podcast and also want to be able to ask our guests live questions, then you might want to join our monthly BoldBrush Live webinars, where our guest artists discuss marketing tips, share inspiring stories, and answer your burning questions in real time. Whether you're a seasoned painter or just starting your creative journey, this is your chance to connect, learn, and spark new ideas. And whether you're stuck on a canvas or building your creative business, this is where breakthroughs happen. Don't miss out. Ignite your passion and transform your art practice by joining us. Our next BoldBrush Live webinar is coming up on July 17th, with our special guest, Noah Buchanan. You can find the sign up link in the show notes. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal, considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e-commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day-by-day, step-by-step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's FASO.com/podcast.
You know,
Totally. And that
and
just
then you never
reminded
run
me.
out of ideas ever.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's there. And what's funny is that reminded me immediately of a quote by Mozart that you mentioned about,
Yeah.
the silence between the notes. Why are you trying to fill every silence? Right? Like that silence of, oh, the person went to the bathroom, I'm gonna grab my phone. You're filling in that silence with something else instead of just
Yes.
enjoying the silence. Right. I think
And
that's
that
yeah.
it unfortunately is habitual. Like I don't feel there's not anything wrong with looking at the phone and
Yeah.
scrolling. But if you look at it in the morning when you wake up, first thing before you, and this is a quote from the same guy who was talking about this other thing, the other instance of keeping your phone off and put away. If you look at it, he said, before you talk to the person next to you, before you look out the window, then you're addicted and you're feeding that addiction. And there's nothing wrong with it. But wait, I remember just today I woke up and the sun was coming in and I just sat there and that's my prayer and meditation time and time to kind of just seek guidance and how I should go about my day and I'm disciplining myself to do that. And sometimes in the past I have reached over, turned off my alarm, and you start looking at your phone and then it's a half an hour later and you realize you don't feel great because you haven't done what's necessary for your well-being first, which is to connect, to just, for me it's connect with nature, connect with people I love, or just connect with the quiet and my own self.
And that brings it back again to, every day is a new day, right? That sun that's streaming in through your window is a brand new sun, right?
Yeah,
Of course, it is the same sun, but it's not the same temperature, humidity, moment. It's not the same day. We're not even in the same spot in the universe, right? Like
yeah, and I'm
we're
not even
moving.
exactly the same. It's
Exactly.
another day for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nice to be aware of that because it's like, what's new today? Like I feel like every day when I wake up, it's like, I wonder what life's gonna throw at me today, but I'm gonna handle it, you know.
Yes, yes.
Or what am I most excited to do today? Because there's always
Yeah.
something fun to do and to look forward to.
And I
But yeah,
try
it's
to
good.
remember. I don't always remember, but I try to what can I bring to all my interactions today? And that was on the forefront of my mind today
Mm.
because I knew we were going to be talking. And it's, early here for me, even because I'm a night owl, so 9 a.m. is early for me. So, but it's like, what can I bring? I want to bring authenticity. I want to bring presence. I want to bring, truth and, to share, to inspire, and I think sometimes we do get focused on, oh, what am I going to have to deal with today? What do I have to do? Rather than thinking, and I'm so guilty of this myself too, especially when I have deadlines and things are getting really busy. But that's when we have to stop and be like, what do I bring to the day? What do I bring to my work? You know, even if you're cleaning your studio, what do I bring to that process? I had a friend just yesterday. She's not a painter, but she's like, I'm going to go play in my office. And I was like, play in your office? She goes, well, I have to clean my office and do my taxes, but I'm going to see it in the mindset of a child going to play. And I was like, that is brilliant, and it just made me look differently at like the grudge work that I, have to do, because there is that associated with art, right? It's not just sitting at your easel painting. It's like there's pre-planning, which I love. But then there's like framing and packing and shipping and things that I don't love, and all the technical stuff. And we have to, find joy and presence in that as well.
Yeah, and it's I feel like for a lot of artists, especially, like we all just want to be in the studio. We all just want to be painting, right?
Yeah,
We all just want to be doing the thing that we love, but the mundane stuff is also what can make or break how if you're able to sell something, right? How can you sell something if you haven't photographed it, if you haven't, put it on the internet, if you haven't, made time for completing that process? I mean, it's totally fine if you're painting as a hobby and it's not your goal to sell, but if you want it to be a career, of course, you are going to have to face the mundane reality of the job. And that is
yeah,
photographing your work and putting it out there and talking to galleries or reaching out to collectors, and if you turn it into, like you said, like a game, like a fun thing where it's like, okay, it's like a video game, let's see what's going to happen, then it's a lot easier to approach things. And that's something I think about quite often, is oftentimes when I realize that I'm avoiding something, it isn't because of that something. Oftentimes it's like something that takes 5 minutes, but I feel like it's my mindset around it or the systems that I'm trying to implement to get myself to do the thing.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
like
was just I was just thinking about that, this morning too, in, kind of my morning prayer meditation, because there were some grudge work things that I need to do, organizational things and stuff that I'm like, I just want to work on the next painting. I just finished a commission. I'm ready to get started on the next painting. And there's other stuff that I need to do that I've been putting off, as we all go through, right? Your inbox is full the day you die because you have stuff you still have to do. Um, but what I realized and kind of felt like I received this morning, just in a beautiful way, was that, we feel overwhelmed when we just, it's our mentality about it, when we're thinking like, I have to do this all on my own. And, for me, my faith is very important to me as a Christian. And I think it flipped that I realized I don't have to do anything on my own. I can have guidance through everything. I can have presence through everything. And so lately, my goal has been, in those mundane things, can I find the holiness in that? Can I find the holy? I used to hate cooking food because that was time away from painting. Can I find holiness in beautiful presence and joy in that process of making food, especially for a loved one? Can I find, just recently I packed up a painting to send to a collector, and usually that's stressful for me, trying to find the box and my myriad of boxes in the garage, and finding the right styrofoam and the right packing, and making sure it's protected and all that, taking it to. And I was like, instead of thinking about that and trying to rush through it, I thought, I'm going to, really focus on each process as I'm cushioning this painting. This is for a collector, a student that I know and care about, and I'm doing something to be caring for their artwork that they are going to enjoy and going to cherish every day, and that's going to bring them joy. And as soon as I switched that, it was the one of the first times packing a painting became a joy, because we're always thinking about, like, oh, getting it right and what could go wrong, and protecting the artwork. And I started thinking about just and it became beautiful. And I'm not saying I want to spend all my time doing that. I still, like, I might one day have an assistant do that, but it was beautifully transformative, because all that changed was my thought process about it. And we all have those things in our day-to-day life. I used to hate setting up to paint back in the day. It is now my favorite thing to do. And I realized when I was paint from life, getting out my brushes, going, especially when I would travel, right, not at my studio, but to an open studio, lugging up all my supplies, getting it set up. I used to dread that. And then I started seeing it as a beautiful process of preparation, like that I'm getting this chance to paint and taking care of my brushes and laying them out and thinking of how I want to, create and, honor the model and spend this sacred time. And now I'm flooded with that every time I'm, schlepping my stuff around and getting ready to set up to paint. It's become a joy. And so we can change that in our mind. And I heard someone once say that, when we feel frustrated, when frustration seeps in, learning ceases. And so if we have to figure out a way to keep the frustration away, and we don't do that by fighting against it. We do it by filling it with something else.
Mhm.
Can I fill it with presence? Can I fill it with, just total fascination and wonder at looking at what I'm going to paint? And then we stop thinking about the like, oh, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. And we start seeing, oh, look at that beautiful color. I wonder what would happen if I mix these colors. I wonder what would happen if I use this brush. And we teach ourselves and we learn new techniques.
Yeah, and it's so easy to
Sorry, I
get
didn't mean to
caught
go
up
off
in.
on such a long
Oh
tangent,
no.
but get
No, but that
passionate
was
about this stuff.
great. That was great because it brings to mind also how, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, how like, when you're in your everyday life in every moment, you're not just an artist at the easel. I feel like
Yeah.
every moment you are an artist
Yes.
because
Yes.
you're in the present moment. And there's a beauty in every moment, whether it's a difficult moment, whether it's a frustrating moment. There's always something there where when you're in the present, there's always
Yes.
something to appreciate. And that brings that to mind that I also have that same struggle, like, oh, setting up, oh no, because especially with oil paints, it can be a lot of
Yeah.
time just to set up, and to have things exactly as you want them, and then by the time you're done setting up, it's like, oh, now I can start, but oh man, it's late,
Exactly.
gosh
Yeah.
darn it. So I totally get that,
Or
but then,
cleaning up your brushes,
oh,
or
oh my
something.
goodness,
That's
yeah,
such
like
a big
one, like
thread.
2 or 3 in the morning after doing like a long like painting, and then it's like, oh, if I don't clean my brushes, they're gonna suffer, and
I
then that's just
know.
gonna make my life harder.
I
um
used to dread that. I can't tell you how many times I pulled myself out of bed being like, I didn't clean my brushes. I need to clean them because they're, expensive and I need to keep them in good shape.
yeah.
Now I've switched it to where I'm like, I love movies, especially foreign
Hmm.
movies and, watching or, epic kind of like historical movies. And, I don't have a lot of time because I'm, painting or doing something else. And so now that's what I do when I clean my brushes. It's like my guilt-free movie watching time at the end of the day. And it usually to
Hmm.
clean the amount I might use in one painting session, I'll show you like this. I
Oh
use
my
about this many
goodness.
brushes. I use a lot of brushes. So um because I'm constantly grabbing new brushes and different hairs to different things. So that's be like painting 8 or 9 hours. And so I have found takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to clean. So it's
It's a
perfect. It
movie.
really fits in with, just putting a movie on and cleaning your brushes. So I've just,
Yeah.
made a way to make it fun. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I do something similar. I listen to podcasts.
oh, good.
Um yeah, because it's like your brain just is like, okay, it's fine. You can listen to this while you like tidy up,
Yeah.
and it doesn't feel like so I guess mundane to clean your
Yes.
brushes. It actually becomes kind of fun. Um but yeah, and then actually speaking of process, because
Yeah.
you did mention a little bit of, you setting up and enjoying it. What is your process like when you started painting, from initial idea all the way to finished piece?
Okay. Yeah, and I guess it depends on whether it's like a studio gallery kind of larger portrait or an alla prima or landscape. Um, I'll start first with the, more simpler, when you're traveling and you're, either doing plein air or, painting someone. To me, that's a little bit like a treasure hunt, right? It kind of brings out that kid explorer in me of like looking for a buried treasure where, I was recently teaching at the Portrait Society of American DC, and we do this they do this faculty face off the first night, and you don't know what model you're going to get. You don't even know where you're going to set up or what artist you're going to be painting with. There's 3 artists to a model. You draw a number out of a hat, you go to that where that number is, and you don't really have control over the model and lighting. You can collaborate with the other artists, but it has to be a good view for everybody. So you just kind of extract treasure from the viewpoint you have, the lighting situation you're in. And there's something beautiful to me about that lack of control and that excavation of that. And the same with the landscape, with, changing light and even bugs and such in nature, of just like having a limited amount of time to just capture something from life and with light. And that really, to me, hones your sensitivities to what moves you as an artist, right? And someone could get that same experience that I got at Portrait Society if they go to an open model workshop, and you set up and pick your space to draw or paint often before the model has set the pose. And sometimes, you'll get a pose you really like and a view you really like, and sometimes you won't. And I actually always learned more on the poses where I didn't have an inspiring view, because I had to find something that moved me and pull it out and make it the dominant feature in the painting. And so that really kind of hones your sensitivities. On the other side, the flip side of that, and I try to do that, a lot, paint from life, especially when I travel and have time to, spend a few days, here and there, doing landscapes or you're painting from life, um, is working on something in the studio. And of course, I'd love to paint from life all the time, but that's just not realistic. Especially even some of the poses that I'd want to do, someone can't hold for, they might hold it once and then never speak to me again because it's too hard to hold, So it's like, I always want to take care of my models, and keep them safe and healthy. But so I do utilize photography. And I think as long as you paint from life regularly, you'll know what to change in photography, because even the best cameras, and I have a really good camera, but it lies to you, it pushes the contrast, it dilutes the color, it makes everything a sharp edge, especially even with the more technologically advanced the systems get. I had this new camera that I took in Africa, and when I was going there the first time a couple of years ago, and it's like you can zoom in and see the dirt on the whisker of a lion, it's like that detailed. I don't need that for painting. So a lot of times with photography, you do have to really selectively edit what you're going to paint so that your painting looks more like you painted it from life and how the human eye sees. Um, but often for me, I'd say from the genesis of a creation of a painting, like why I choose certain things to paint, first it comes from observation, which we had already talked about, just being really observant of people around you, whether you're interacting with them personally or seeing them from a distance. And sometimes I can, if it's a friend of mine, I can recreate it or take a picture in the moment. Or sometimes if it's someone I don't know, maybe ask them to model or recreate it with another model, because it may not be about the particular person, but about a gesture or a feeling or some of their humanity that I'm seeing come through. And I can kind of replicate that same thing with the model that I bring into a photo session with. And so after that inspiration, it's gathering reference. And I try to do that pretty quickly after I have the initial inspiration, even if I may not have time to paint it for months, or, I have some things that I have had reference for that I haven't painted for years that I will still paint at some point. But gathering the reference and, doing a photo shoot, my ideal situation is to get, if someone inspires me that I want to paint, try to paint them from life for a couple hours, even if it's a different kind of pose, and then do a photo shoot with them over a couple days. So just like you and I converse for like a half an hour, getting to know each other before doing this interview, that way you have time to converse with them, get to know them, and maybe do some photos the first day and then bring them back for a second session and do more photos, because I don't just want to overly art direct to get my idea. Often when I see who they are and what they do naturally, what develops in the best reference develops out of a combination of an idea I had and allowing them to just bring themselves to the moment. And that kind of creates this other thing that I couldn't have come up with on my own, these beautiful moments, right? And it might be how someone tilts their head or how they move their hand or something that you pull into that, and then it becomes this kind of collaboration, so to speak. On a side note, I also love doing commissions for that fact, because it's more of a collaboration. But so once I have the reference, Then the process between that and painting, and this is something I teach to my advanced online class, is they'll send in their photos and I'll teach them what something that I do on all of my reference that I'm using photo reference for is I generally don't have one photo that I know, oh, I'm going to paint this photo, right? I will have 5 or 6 photos from a session and maybe take the hands from one or a background from another and kind of combine it. And I'll do it in Photoshop, very basic Photoshop, because I leave it really rough because I know I'm going to paint it. So it's just equivalent to doing a color study of merging elements, creating the composition, figuring out the parameters of the canvas, and also problem solving and strategizing as if I were doing the painting before I ever put paint to canvas. And this is a very important part that's not often talked about enough in like a in-person alla prima class, but it's something I learned not in art school, but I learned from being friends with other fine artists that were in galleries and doing this work before I was doing this work. And I was able to observe them and ask them questions in their studios. This is that pre-planning, right? There are many different ways from a photo that you can compose it, crop it, um, subdue elements, enhance elements, because it's still very important to get the essential focal point versus the peripheral elements, a hierarchy of importance. What do you want to say in the piece, right? We don't want to just copy a photograph. We're not a copy machine. But what do we want to say? And when you do that same process with photography as you would do painting from life, then often people are like, oh, you painted this from life. And it's like, no, I couldn't have painted this person in this pose from life. They're walking or they're, whatever, or they're out in a forest and there's moving sunlight. Um, and sometimes I'll do a quick little study, but doing those comps in Photoshop. Some people like to do it in oil paint, do like little comps. To me, I love to do it on the computer, and I'm like, it's really, really rough. I mean, it could be so much better, but I don't spend time learning how to do Photoshop. I mean, I use Photoshop elements, like the really basic, because I don't want it to be overly refined or polished. I just want it to be enough of a jumping off point for me to know where I'm going. And at that point, and this is what I teach the students, because I do it with their photographs and screen share and ask them, like, what do you want? And like ask them the questions like, what do you want to be the dominant focal point? What do you want? Where do you want the eye to go? How can we orchestrate the rhythms to bring about that visual story that you're wanting to convey through this piece of art? And sometimes that's darkening an area, bringing out light in another area, things that mimic what a brush would do. And we're problem solving basically, so that when you start the painting on the canvas with your brushes and your paint, you've problem solved 90% of it and you have a clear idea of where you want the finished painting to go. Then there's the balance of, and I guide them through this where, we work over weeks on certain paintings that they've chosen their own private work. And I share what I'm working on for galleries. Um, and then the process for myself is you kind of know 80% where you're wanting to go. You have a clear intention, you've strategized, and you start painting. But I still try to leave that 20% open to the fluid creativity of the moment, because I might start painting and it might start going in a slightly different direction, but I might like that better. And to me, I find it's very important to have that balance and not be so attached to what I wanted to do that I miss out on something even better. There's stuff that comes through. It's kind of like you and I were talking about traveling before we started the recording, right? It's kind of like when you're going to a new city you've never been to. Yes, there are a few key things that I might really want to see. Maybe there's an art exhibition or a landmark or a historical building or something. But I always want to leave in big swaths of time open to wander and explore and discover things that I couldn't have found in a tour book. And I don't have, I don't want to overschedule myself. And that's the same way with painting. I want to have a clear intention, a game plan, but I want to be really present through the painting process and be open to the fluid creativity of the moment. Because sometimes that can be just so beautiful. And so that process is, varies the time scale, as you're working through things. And then when I'm like, think I'm almost done, but I want to change just maybe a few things, right? But you've been looking at it for a long time. And that's where I recognize in myself the perfectionism comes in. I'm like, I just want to refine a couple things. The best advice, and I got this from my mom in high school when I was working on a painting, and I was like just working on a painting for myself, and I would overwork things. And she's like, when you are 99.9% done and you just want to change a few things, leave it for 24 hours. Don't look at it, leave it. Come back with fresh eyes. If those things still bother you, adjust them. But a good portion of the time, you won't remember what they are. And I'd say a good 70% of the time I come back and I'm like, I can't even remember what I wanted to change because I know like it is done. And that keeps you from overworking because I get that question a lot from students. Um, and then if something still really bothers you, then you come back and you can see it clearly.
Yeah,
So that's my
totally.
process. Sorry, long,
Once
long answer.
Oh, but I mean, I think I'm sure there's even more, right? It's one of those
Yeah,
things where it's
that's
like, well, I
yeah,
mean,
that's
this
the
is kind of
basics. Yeah.
like, yeah, I can do the basics because it is I feel like you might have the same or similar process every time, but it always maybe changes a little, right? And like how you said, you might start a painting and then it might deviate a little bit because sometimes, and I like to think that with a painting, you're actually having a dialogue with the painting
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
And if you try to like force your desires onto the painting, oftentimes it will fight back.
Well, yeah, it's like trying to force a conversation. That's why, I
Yeah.
mentioned like I appreciated you sending me the questions ahead of time and I glanced at them, but I actually didn't thoroughly read through because I'd rather just us have a dialogue. I feel like that's
Mhm.
more authentic and you don't pre-plan what you're going to say. And I think it is important with oil paints because there are technical things that can just you don't want to put a lot of white paint in a place where you're going to have a shadow. So there are, you do need to strategize and plan, but it's like the minimal amount just so that you feel comfortable to start jumping in and exploring that. And one other thing I'll mention about the process of why I like doing these comps on computer is we all kind of have our highest creativity at different times during the day. Like I'm kind of a night owl. So I know early mornings, not the, before 9, not the best. I also, at right around sunset, that hour around sunset, I just want to be outside. I want to take a walk or look in an art book. And I'm just like, unless I'm drinking a lot of caffeine, my mind starts to wander and I'm not as focused. Beginning of the day, middle of the day, and late at night is my times to paint. So in the mornings when I'll, do my emails or do pre-planning work or, at sunset, go for a walk or I'll do the pre-planning work. So, our best varies from day to day, or you could be sick one day, or maybe you have appointments and you don't have enough time to paint. That's a really good time to kind of work on these comps and do something creative that doesn't actually involve like getting out all your paints and painting. And what I tell students that work with me is like I keep a folder on my desktop every year of like painting ideas. And those are the finished comps that I've done. And some are really rough and but I'll throw them in there and these are all painting ideas. So at any given time when I feel like painting, I can go into that folder and I have things ready to go. And it really carries over because I have more in there than I can do in one year. I might have like 80 ideas in there that I've kind of flushed out and thrown in there that of things I want to do. And maybe I only can paint 30 of them, and then they carry over. So I have stuff that like from 2020 in my folder that I haven't painted yet, and it's just like, so you never run out of ideas. But, I find doing those little things on Photoshop, you're thinking about painting. And so you feel really inspired creatively, to do it. And that's a good thing to do when you don't have a lot of time. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a way of, keeping that creative aspect without necessarily the time or the pressure.
yeah,
It's like, oh well, I don't have time to actually lay out my paints and do all of this stuff, but I can do this.
yeah,
Which still feeds into the actual process. So that's a really good yeah, it's a really good side thing to add. Because it can also be important for the process to have
mhm,
a nice, like, oh well, I already worked out like the values and
yeah,
the composition and all of the complexities. Now it's just take it. Just
yeah.
I think I might try that if ever I start doing like photo shoots with models, since I'm on the same boat. Um, but yeah, and then actually now I'm really curious to know what the transition was like for you to go from, you know, having painting as like a side thing or as a like I have a day job but I'm painting. What was it like for you to transition into becoming a full-time artist?
Yeah, sure. And I just thought too, because you mentioned drawing,
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
I will do a charcoal drawing before I do a painting of the same subject.
Hmm.
And often if it's a commission, like the one I just finished, I'm going to give them the charcoal drawing, or the charcoal drawing before a painting that I'm sending to a gallery. You can put both in the gallery or both in the show. And that's always kind of nice too, to always build your drawing skills.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the transition, I went to art school and I originally went for illustration. And then it was very pivotal when I realized that like I became exposed to John Singer Sargent, went to the Met for the first time, realized that I really wanted to do fine art painting. And but I knew I wanted to do that. And I started taking like painting classes at just like a local school where we paint in front of the model. And I mean a local place in New Mexico. And knew I didn't want to go into illustration at that point, but do these fine art paintings. And so I was doing that in the evenings, but I needed to have a regular job. And I love working with kids. And I worked at this preschool. And then as I worked there doing helping people with the breaks, like I said, then they had, it was a private elementary school next to this preschool, very small elementary school. And they had this after school program and they said it's just the kids hanging out. They would just play on computer or just sitting, around and play with toys or whatever before, from ages like third grade to sixth or seventh grade for their parents to pick them up. And they said, would you like to, do this program because the teacher's leaving? I was like, okay. And I'm sitting there and the kids are just playing on computer and not doing anything creative. And I took out a big, stack of printer paper and a black magic marker and I started drawing. And the age range was, very vast through these kids. And I would draw, I made them their own coloring book pages. Like one kid was like, oh, I want Ninja Turtles, so I would do that, or I'd do an elephant or I'd do a person and then they'd color it in. And then they started getting really into the art. And pretty soon they weren't playing on the computer games anymore. They wanted to do art. And so we would draw together. And then it progressed to like me setting up, easels because they did have easels. And I had set them up face to face so they painted each other's self-portraits and things. And it was basically like I could spend that 2 hours doing whatever I wanted to do with the kids. And sometimes I would sit and sketch them too as they were sketching and they were fascinated with seeing me sketch portraits from life. And then one day, one of the parents came in and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I love," and it was just a little quick 30-minute sketch I did of her son. And she's like, I love that. And I was like, oh, here you go. I didn't really understand about portrait commissions at that time because I wasn't exposed to that. And she goes, could I pay you to do a bigger like charcoal or drawing? So I started doing charcoal drawings. I wasn't even doing oil paintings at that time. So many of the parents wanted them, and the daycare was like, you can put up a flyer, and I was just selling them so fast. I had more work than I could do. And then some of them wanted paintings. And, I realized at that point that I could transition and it was into doing it full time. And it was hard because I did love teaching and it transitioned to me into teaching adults painting, which is something I was actually doing in the evenings a couple times a week, teaching at the school that I was going to. They asked me to teach figure drawing because I'd gone to school for that. So I was teaching adults in the evening, kids during the day. And then I just started transitioning into doing art full time. And I was just inundated with commissions and I loved doing commissions. I loved working with people and painting the particularities of a human being. And then, getting into the gallery work, there were a couple things that happened where I was in Santa Fe just walking around and in one of my favorite galleries and it struck I wasn't trying to get in the gallery. I did not have a body of work. I had just done these commissions and was doing some painting on my own. And the gallery owner was so nice. And they were like, oh, do you have a website? I didn't even have a website at the time. And they were like, do you have pictures of your paintings? And I showed them. And they're like, oh, we're doing a group show. We'd love to have you in the group show. And I was like, oh, okay. And simultaneously at the same time, I took my first workshop with Jeremy Lipking, and it was his first workshop he ever taught. And it was just like a 2-day workshop, and I got to know him and his wife, and then he was teaching another workshop that was longer in Taos, New Mexico, and I took that as well. And I brought in a painting. I'd taken a photograph of his wife in the first workshop, and I thought, I'm going to bring in a painting of his wife for him to critique, because then it's not critiquing the subject matter because he knows the subject matter. He's just critiquing the skill, and I really wanted to learn. And so I brought that, and I'll never forget, he looked at it a long time, and I was getting really self-conscious, and he wasn't saying anything. And his wife, Danielle, said, that means he likes it. It's good. It's good. And he made, just gave me like one suggestion, and he really liked it. And then like the next day they decided they wanted to buy it. And I hadn't even thought of that. I didn't even know what to sell a painting for. She's like, here, this is how much you should sell the painting for. And she was very generous and so sweet. And they've become very, very close friends. And she said, you should come out to California. He's, going to be teaching another workshop. And I had a friend living out in California. And Jeremy and his wife said, you need to be in galleries. And I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm ready. I never felt ready, at that, because I was still like entrenched in being an overachiever perfectionist. I'm still an overachiever, but I pursue excellence instead of perfection. Excellence is faith-based, perfection is fear-based. I've learned that since then. And excellence, you just keep going and you learn more and grow and put the stuff out there so that it blesses people. So Jeremy showed the painting he bought to his gallery in Beverly Hills, and they invited me in to a show based on that one painting. And so then I put work in that show. It sold opening night. They invited me in the next show. I came out for the show and was visiting a friend, and they said, just stay out here and paint. And so I stayed out there and slept on my friend's couch, and that's when I met a lot of other painters my age. And I realized that this was a movement. This was like in the early 2000s, and it like a movement, a resurgence of realist art and painting. I'd say representational art, because it's not painting like a photograph, but, painting similar to like the French naturalists, like um, Dagnon Bovary and some of these Emile Friant and these like painting how you see life. And I painted with Jeremy regularly, and made other friends out there, friends that I'm still to this day friends with, and that are painters and well-known painters now too. And that's kind of how that transitioned. And like very soon after getting into that gallery, one of the first days he would set up a model for us to come paint in the gallery, and sometimes during shows we would paint in front of the patrons. And the editor of American Artist magazine was in there, Steve Daughtry, and he saw my work and put me in an article. And then the Southwest Art contacted me for their 21 under 31, and put me in that. And then that, at that time, there wasn't like the social media we have now. It's, I think, a lot easier for artists to get their work seen, which is great. But you had to get in a magazine, you had to, be seen by galleries, and it just kind of took off from there. But yeah, initially it was commissions, and I still do commissions, and I still love it, but I only do a few a year, maybe even just a couple a year.
Wow. And I really love that quote you said about pursuing excellence, because I relate so hard with being a perfectionist. And it's interesting how over time, you realize that perfectionism will take you here, but pursuing something better than perfection, which is just pursuing that excellence, takes you up here, right? It takes you much
Yes.
higher. And you wouldn't think, but
But sometimes perfectionism keeps us from working because we don't feel ready. We don't feel like we can do it well enough. We're not, it keeps us stuck,
totally.
right? But excellence, I feel, is something everyone can reach for. And that was something that Richard constantly said, pursue excellence, and just that's something that to me not only fosters creativity and you bringing your best to the moment, but it also encourages exploration, it encourages growth. And And it's, again, it's really, excellence is very faith-based. It's very spirit-based to me to pursue. And you're putting goodness out into the world. You're putting excellence out into the world. You're putting inspiration out into the world. Where perfectionism is more fear-based, ego-based. Like, what if it's not good enough? What are they going to think? What are they, all that stuff that completely blocks creativity. And I think if anyone is blocked in creativity, look at what you're thinking. You know, your mind is a palette, just like your palette is a palette. My palette's very dirty now because I was painting yesterday. But and I did clean my palette before I went to bed. Um, but I always tell students, we have to keep the palette of our mind clean too, because we know muddy color on a palette, scrape it off. Otherwise it gets in your painting. Muddy thinking also gets in the way of your best work. We've got to, and we're human. We're going to have fearful thoughts. We can't avoid that, but we can recognize the moment we have it, or a self-deprecating thought, or a perfectionist thought, which is really rooted in, like negativity. We can replace it with the desire to pursue excellence and a faith-based thought, a kindness to ourselves. Like, why am I feeling that I want to be perfect? What I really want to do is capture uh, the purest form of expression in an excellent manner that I can artistically. And that you can feel it when you change those words. You can feel yourself propelled towards creativity rather than afraid to pursue it. So
Totally. Totally. Yeah. That's such an excellent point. uh, but yeah, it's so true because when I do think of like perfectionism, it almost feels like I don't even like it's like you can't even leave your house until you look good or like your shoes perfectly match. I don't know, whatever
yeah,
outfit you're wearing, or your makeup is absolutely perfect. It's like, well, you're never gonna leave your house.
I
you know?
know that's true.
Yeah.
And you miss out on stuff. It's like, I thought about that the other night when I wanted to go out, and of course I'm going to have to be out by an area where there's traffic to photograph the sunset. And I'm like, I'm literally in my pajamas because I was going to go to bed early. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm going out in my pajamas and slippers because if I take time to get dressed or even comb my hair, I'm going to miss it. And I don't want to miss one morsel of like this beauty and of life. And we do miss stuff when we're
Yeah.
trying to be perfect.
Yeah, and that also, that I feel like if everything was perfect, right? If it's kind of like, the brain when it's exposed to like a person whose face is like perfectly symmetrical, it almost feels wrong. Like it just doesn't look right, or it's like not
But yeah,
something your brain remembers. There's a beauty in those differences, those little like imperfections that make that thing look more beautiful, right? So I'm sure
it's
someone
so,
saw
so
you taking
true.
those pictures if they were driving by, they'd be like, oh, that's interesting.
Maybe
That's
they
like
looked at the sunset because they saw someone in their pajamas out looking at the sun.
exactly. They must be like, oh
Maybe
wow, like
they,
she's got a point there, like there's more to just like, oh, let me just perfectly dress up and perfectly do my hair and be like a robot. Like that's boring.
yeah. And what you were
Um
saying about the perfectly symmetrical face, it reminded me, there was something I saw years ago that really helped me in my art. And it was in a different art form. I was watching the director's commentary of Pride and Prejudice, the one with Keira Knightley. Um, I think it's now 20 years old, 25 years old, whoever, because I saw something. I know that it was like their anniversary. They were doing the interview, and I was like, no, that can't be. Director's commentary is fascinating. There's a lot of different artistic things that I pulled from that. So if you haven't watched that, All Artists, I highly recommend it. To even just the color palette he used and certain things he did to enhance story and your relatability to character design and color tones and flesh tones. And yeah, it was really fascinating. But there was the one scene, which I'm sure you remember, the ball in the ballroom, and it was a continuous shot. And he said, it was something he wanted as a director, his kind of nerdy geeky thing as a director, to get this continuous take with hundreds of people and extras and stuff. And they had the camera on a track going from one room to another, and each actor had to hit their spot, their line, their movement, everything to get it right. And if someone messed up, they had to start it all the way from the beginning because they didn't want to edit it. He wanted this accomplishment. And he said it took about nine, I think it was nine, if I remember correctly, like about 9 times to get the perfect shot. where everyone did everything perfectly. And he said it was so boring that they actually went back and used an earlier shot where someone slightly messed up because it had more life to it. And that was revelatory to me when I heard it. That really like kind of cleared out that last little gripping of perfectionism in me, because perfectionism is boring and everyone's idea of perfect is different. Now I find so much more beauty and excellence and authenticity, right? And authenticity is so much more powerful than perfection,
Oh,
because it has this
yes.
power to propel emotion. And so yeah, watching that was really powerful.
I love that because I love that movie so much. I'm gonna have to watch it with the commentary. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, like there's again, to bring it back to like having a painting that's where you can kind of see the beginning stages, right?
Yes.
It's that mystery. If everything is perfectly spelled out, then there's no digging, there's no looking for something deeper, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like of course that's with painting, but that's also with life, right? That's
Yes.
like, oh, there's something more that I want to dig into, and that's where the I feel like where poets get inspired and where artists
Yes.
get inspired, isn't that I want to understand this, and it feels like a rabbit hole, and it's just deeper and deeper every time. But yeah, totally, totally. And then also I did want to ask you because of course there is the mundane, boring part of painting, which is of course making a living. And I wanted to ask you because you mentioned how in the early 2000s it was all about being in a magazine, word of mouth, and like
Yeah.
being known in that way. Today it's social media. What ways have you found have helped you sell your work? Has it been only galleries or only social media or a bit of a blend of different things?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much an equal blend, because I mean, one of the things with being a fine artist, you do have to get used to like there's an ebb and flow. And it is good to be in several different galleries. I mean, nowadays people sell their work directly on the internet, and that's something you can do as well too. I don't do that except for commissions, only because I established with galleries and they work really hard for me, and so I want to honor that relationship. But I know artists that are starting out now that aren't in regular galleries and they sell work directly, and I think that's fine. It's we just want to always honor the relationships we've established. Um, and from for myself back then, it really did start with galleries, and it was important to have galleries that have different peak times throughout the year for their tourism for people to see. It's not as much as a concern now because online, like people will still buy online through the gallery, even if it's not a time that they would actually go visit the gallery in person. I think online sales are so so big now. Um, but so I have several galleries that I supply work through, and just because I've been in galleries a long time and um have a regular collector base, and they always bring in new collectors, and that's really nice. And of course any magazine article that comes up will then, and there's the physical magazine. I'm glad they still exist because I still like to flip through like a physical magazine. And but then they have the online version too, and so people see your work through that and then can contact the galleries. But also there is a huge promotion through social media. You post a painting, and often what happens is I'll post a painting that I'm doing for a show for a gallery, and someone will see it through my post and then contact the gallery and purchase the painting. Or a collector comes in the gallery, sees one work, and then they go to your Instagram, and then they are familiar with more work, and then they might commission you to do something too. So it's just it all intertwines and works together. I also think entering contests are important. I mean, I don't think we have to be careful not to be attached to the results of the contest because so much of it is subjective, you know. But definitely for me, a huge thing was getting that first painting as a finalist in Portrait Society. That really put, you know, put my work in the eyes of a lot of people, and I had a lot of galleries contacting me after that I kind of had my choice from. Um, but there's like the BoldBrush contest. Raymar used to do a contest. There's a lot of online contests. Some of the art magazines do online contests where it can even be sold work. that can go into that. And I think the BoldBrush, I always tell students to enter the BoldBrush contest because I think that's great. It's a very minimal fee. It gets a lot of exposure. And, some of the people that I've talked to that are gallery owners and or work with galleries, they actually look to see who placed as not even who won the grand prize, but who placed as finalists. And they find new talent. They invite those artists into group shows, and they look at these online contests, and I did have someone that worked at a very prominent gallery say that they reach out to BoldBrush finalists for a new up and coming talent, and so that's something to just um, enter as much as you can, but again, you might not place as finalist one month and the next month you could win grand prize, and it depends on the judge and it's all subjective, um, partially objective up to a certain point, and then it becomes subjective, and it's I've judged a few contests, and it's one of the hardest things to do because one of the most recent ones I had done was like the plein air competition, online, and I look at all the objective things like values, edges, design. That only narrows it down to maybe 60 paintings, and you have 12 awards to give out. And at that point, it's really hard. And you wish you could, as a judge, reach out to the person and say, I had to pick one here, but your painting was amazing. Or sometimes you pick an artist, you don't know the artist's name. So there was one instance where I had picked the same artist for two different categories. The two paintings were very different. I didn't know it was the same artist. And they're like, we can't award the same artist. And I'm like, that's hard, because you wish you could tell the artist, I think I even asked them, can you tell the artist, but, but yeah, so all of it's valid. And I think, one of the important things is just to put your artwork out there to be seen, not to get mired down in perfection. Um, Also not to get really caught up in that hamster wheel treadmill of saying like, oh, I have to post every day, or I have to do this every day, or I have to follow this formula. Just all I can say is what works for me. Concentrate on doing good, strong, competent work. Paintings that will stand the test of time. Paintings, like my goal is always to like try to do a painting that could be in a museum. Looks like it belongs at least, I'm not just throwing something out there or sharing it on social media just because, oh, I haven't posted in a few weeks, um, but post when you have something to share. And it doesn't have to be a perfect finished thing. I like to post pictures of progress, to show to show things in progress, to show like even the ideas, the impetus to something of like being outside and finding inspiration and talking about it, because there are a lot of artists and students that follow, not just collectors. And I feel that's important for me to share too. It's not just about showing a polished finish. It's what I love when I see, I just went to the Sargent in Paris show at the Met, which is phenomenal. Like anyone who can go see that, go see it. Because it goes through, it's very unique because it goes through his student years all the way to his like culmination into his really big work. But you see a lot of studies. You see studies in watercolor, you see studies in oils, you see studies on locations or in the studio, and you see process. This show to me was more about process than any of the other amazing Sargent exhibitions I've been to. And it walks you through in this progression. Um, on the other note to that, I'll show, because I just have it right here because I was showing my class the other day, Richard's new portrait and figure book, which just came out. He was working on this for several years before he died. This was his like kind of dying wish to get this out. And the process of looking through this book, some of these go back to the 60s, you know, and then go up, into current day. And there's lots of drawings, lots of paintings, all throughout his life, some personal work, some commission work, some gallery work. And I got the same feeling. I saw the book first online because Nancy shared, with me, and we walked through all the images online, and I saw some of it in person with Richard as he was showing me and some of the images. And I'd say 80% of this has never been seen before. These are images that have not been reproduced even in a magazine, because he had such a huge, body of work. And when you walk through, you just feel like you're moving through a piece of music, it flows from like different time periods, and it's this progression of someone's life, and it's just so powerful. And I felt that through the Sargent show as well. And it's interesting that this just came out and that just opened, at the same time. And I think Richard would smile at that, hopefully Sargent too, but walking through Sargent's work, and as it progresses through different stages of his life, I could recognize certain stages that I've gone through and am going through and have yet to go through, and it's just this, when we fall in love with that process of becoming an artist, we're basically sharing our observations of the world. That's how we create a body of work. We don't, sit down and just say, I'm going to do a body of work. But if we're really authentic and attentive to what's capturing our attention each day and painting that with as much honesty, integrity, authenticity, excellence as we can, we end up with a body of work, that reflects our sensitivities, and what moves our spirit. And, that's what I hope to do for the rest of my life until I'm no longer here. And it's what I try to help teach people, how to tap into that, because um, that was as much, if not more, of a part of becoming a professional artist than learning the techniques, is to try to understand how to excavate that in myself, and really steep myself in that authenticity and share it, and not be afraid to be seen and share it with the world, even if it's imperfect, because we're moved by authenticity in others. We're not moved by perfection, yet sometimes we're scared to share that in ourselves and in our work. And, it's something I valued and admire in both Richard and Nancy's work and Sargent's work, is there's an honesty and authenticity. And even in an unfinished study, it can be so moving. And yeah, anyways.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And again, it's that I feel like, every single time I discuss painting with someone like you who's really introspective and really thoughtful about it, it's like it always just reminds me how painting is so much a microcosm of a macrocosm, where,
Mm.
there's like like don't be a perfectionist in your work, but also that don't be a perfectionist in terms of how you present yourself either, because again, that's like, of course, it's easy to look at Sargent paintings or Richard's paintings and say, oh my God, he was always perfect. It's like, no, he was not born with a paintbrush in his hand
Yeah,
and
exactly.
knowing how to paint, right? He went through all the stages and he went through the whole learning process. And he probably went through the exact same mental blocks that we all face as artists in this career, because they're like rites of passage that we go through and it's inevitable. So it's good to
Exactly. I
remember that.
often think that, like, there was a time where Sargent was doing his first big portrait and stood in front of this canvas and was probably scared, like, I don't know if I can do this.
Mhm.
Every artist in existence have had their firsts. And I think the goal is just to keep having those first moments and challenging yourselves. It's like I heard someone once say, if you remember your last bad painting, you're not painting enough. And yeah, so, and I remember Richard saying, when it was on, before I met him, on the Captain's Portrait video, which they have remastered and put out now again, digitally, which I'm looking forward to looking at just in the past year. He says at the end, when he's talking, he said, painting is never easy. Sometimes, there are those paintings that sometimes fall off the end of your brush, but it's always hard work. It's always concentration. He said, but the more you do it, the less you turn out the turkeys, you know?
Mhm.
But there are still those. I've even seen some Sargents where it's like, okay, those were in the back of his closet probably, and now have gotten excavated. And it's like, but it's so helpful to see that. To me, it's like I saw 90% of the time Richard just, with his bravado and knowledge, just whip out a masterpiece. But there was another percentage of the time I saw him get frustrated, wipe it off, redo it, wipe it off. Um, I learned more those times watching that. And one of the things I so admire that speaks to his integrity is when he painted my portrait, and he wasn't originally going to turn it into it wasn't done with the premise of turning it into an instructional video. It was just to record, and he was learning how to record, and Scott Burdick was showing him how to do that so that he could record for posterity. And he asked, I was supposed to paint with him that day, and he just asked me spur of the moment, and he's like, would you mind modeling for us? And I'm like, sure. Yeah, I painted with him a bunch. And, this was in 2015, if I remember correctly. And so I sat in Nancy's studio, and him and Nancy and Scott painted me. And then I came back the second day, and he did, just a little bit more the second day. And the video was so good, he decided to turn it into an instructional video and then did a voiceover for it. But what was really interesting is, and I know because I've had other people paint me, is that I don't think I have typical, like my nose is a little longer, my mouth's a little fuller, like I don't have typical spatial relationships, and they usually find it hard to paint my nose and mouth. I don't have one of those, like, to me, really nice noses I like to paint with angles. Mine's very round. There's no like angles to capture shadows. And so it's a little bit of a challenge. And he painted the nose and eye, and he kept moving, like he changed it like 3 times. He changed the spatial relationship of the nose and the mouth. And it was really good the first time, but it wasn't exactly me, like not exactly. And he moved it. And I think a lot of people would have left it like, oh, that's close enough. And I really admired his dedication to excellence. Again, not perfection, but excellence. To be like, he knew me. We were really close. I mean, one of the things that moved me, after he passed, is his own daughters both said to me individually, you were like a daughter to him. And he really wanted, it was the one time he was painting my portrait, he really wanted to capture that. And I know that feeling of why I've painted his portrait, and I want to capture exactly who he is. And so he moved it. And so there was this debate, not by him, but afterwards, oh, do we cut that out of the video? Right? I heard some people talking about it. Do we cut this out of the video? Because that's not normal for him to redo that. And I'll never forget, he came in, and while the people were discussing that, he said, absolutely not. I think it's really important to show people excellence does not mean that you get it perfect the first time. Excellence is knowing you can fix it. And he just grabbed his coffee and walked out. We were like, oh, that is so beautiful.
That is so true. That is so true. Oh man, because
or actually, it was confidence. Sorry, not excellence. Confidence isn't knowing you can get it perfectly. Confidence is knowing you can fix it. And then he spoke about the excellence of getting it accurate. And yeah, and to me, the confidence and excellence go hand in hand.
They do.
But I love that. And so he wasn't worried about his ego or what people would think of him or being perfect, even though I would say he was that perfect excellence 90% of the time. Way more above the average of all most of us. But he wanted to show, he was willing to be vulnerable and show that for a teaching moment. And that, to me, I already thought so highly of him, but that just elevated like his integrity in my mind, that he wanted that, because he knows we all struggle with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember as he was adjusting that, he didn't get frustrated. He got joyful, like, oh, I'll just get it better the second time. Let me, change this. And I learned a lot just listening to that. And I was able to watch it because he put a big mirror behind him so I could see what he was painting. Because again, we didn't know it would turn into a video, and now anyone can watch it. But it was just, it was so educational for me to see him not get frustrated with that process.
Yeah. And again, it's that that quote that you just said that he said. It's really ringing in my head, because when I feel like a lot of the fear that young artists have, especially when they're just starting out, is they don't quite know what they're doing. And that's totally fine. That's why you practice, right? But when you reach a point where you are, much further on with a lot more experience under your belt, you will always eventually reach a point where you still don't really know what you're doing. But hey, you have all of these tools that you've gathered that give you that confidence to be like, that's fine. This isn't new, in the sense that, like, I know that I can trust my abilities to overcome. and
Yeah.
to get it, even if it takes me 20 tries and I have to wipe it off and wipe it off and wipe it off. Like there's no shame in wiping off. And I feel like when someone's a beginner, they're always ashamed or afraid, usually of, oh no, I gotta start over. Oh no, I feel
Yes.
defeated. Oh no, it didn't look right the first time, so I'm gonna do it again and again and again, but it's still not hitting. It's like, yeah, that's fine. That's how you learn. That's
It
how you
is.
build
It
that
is.
confidence.
And if you realize, like, learn to recognize that, anytime you feel fear or shame, it's just a marker that you're out of alignment with your true nature. You've delved into the ego, and I don't mean ego as identity. I mean ego as like who we think we should be.
Mm,
I feel like spirit is our true identity, and who we are, the essence of ourselves is always curious, always creative, always believing in the best. And when we step into fear, we're stepping into a false identity, right? And that will trip us up when we're trying to work and discover. And so I think, how you were saying that, I think is so beautiful, is that like that idea of like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know what to do. you know, Over the years, we accumulate things where we're then sometimes, yeah, we see a model, we're like, I know what to do for this. But for the most part, especially I'm pushing myself to do new work, and we always want to push ourselves to grow. We don't know how to do it, you know? And I'd say to switch, instead of making it personal, like, I don't know what I'm doing, which is a self-defeating thought, to then think, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to play with it until I figure it out. And it's going to be a discovery, right? And then everything becomes an endless discovery. And that's how we grow and, and learn and adapt to new techniques. And I remember I don't know if you're familiar with the artist John Coleman. He's a Western painter and sculptor, amazing, both painter and sculptor. And I had taken like a sculpting class with him. We taught at the same school in Scottsdale. And so I went in and was able to audit his class. And I really wanted to get into sculpture. And he's just an amazing human being, incredible artist. But like Richard, just a wisdom. You want to follow him around, and like as soon as they start talking, like turn the tape recorder on your phone, because they're going to say something brilliant when they're walking by. And you know John talked about, he said, the only time as an artist you should play to your strengths is if you're giving like a demo on stage in front of people. In your studio, you should be playing to your weaknesses, and he means by that is like, and he would correlate, there's so much correlation between art and music. He'd say, that's where you riff. That's when you go off the, music kind of thing, and you play. But you should also be trying to elevate your weaknesses to your strengths in your own work. That should be your goal. If you're playing to your strengths in your studio work all the time, you're not learning anything. You have to experiment. You have to dive into the unknown and trust that you're going to figure it out. Like jumping into the deep end, trusting you're going to swim or float or whatever, but you'll figure it out. And yeah, and that's how we grow as artists, because we don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. But I think that really good, kind of litmus test is when you start to feel any kind of shame. And I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't bring that up when it comes to art. We bring it up in other areas of life. Shame is not in any way part of our true essence as a spiritual being, having this human experience, with our sensitivities as an artist. And so when we feel it, we know we're kind of out of alignment with our true selves. When we feel fear, we're out of alignment. And it doesn't mean anything bad is happening. It's just we're human, right? And I constantly pop into those places when I'm painting. I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm out of alignment. Because when we're in that place of fear, shame, usually we start to go down this road, snowball effect, of thinking we don't know technically what we're doing. And I'm not as good as so and so, or I don't have this skill, and then there's no recovering from that, right? Because we're thinking we're lacking something that we don't have. But when you recognize that, just means I'm out of alignment. So to be in alignment means to be present, be creatively curious, be in that state of wonder, which is, to me, going back to that quote, being like, a little child, being in a state of wonder, a state of discovery, a state of figuring it out, trusting that you'll get there. And then you look at your painting and you go, oh, well, maybe this area is too warm or that's too hard of an edge. So maybe if I cool it or lighten it or create this edge, oh yeah, that's going to take me to where I want to be. And that takes you down the road to asking yourself intelligent questions as a creator. And pretty soon, all of a sudden, you don't judge yourself, right, for having those negative thoughts. You just flip it and take yourself back into a place of like discovery and exploration, and you figure out a solution. And there's never one right answer. I always tell students there's like, and I try to tell myself this too when I'm struggling with something to get something in the studio. There's never one right answer. There's always several ways you can solve a problem. And the choice of what's appropriate for the painting, yes, might depend upon nature, the lighting, or something like that. But it also mostly depends on what you want to visually say in your painting. It's kind of up to you. So what I do in classes, I present students, I go, you could solve it this way, this way, this way, this way, which is in alignment with your vision. And then they pick the one that is. And then we analyze whether it serves the subject and what the overall visual element we're trying to convey, and then choose appropriately. And then it becomes like those, I don't know if you ever did those choose your own adventure books where it's like, yeah, I loved those as a kid where you're like going on this adventure, this quest to the castle. Is like, do you go right? Do you go left? And depending on where you turn to a different page in the book, it's kind of like that. And then it becomes when I can honestly say from experience, the areas I used to dread the most is when I hit an unknown area I didn't know how to solve. It is now my favorite part of a painting. It is absolutely my favorite part of painting. I know that might be hard for someone to believe who hasn't experienced that yet or walked that journey. But now I'm like, oh, I get to learn something new. I get to go on this quest. I get to figure this out, you know? And then it becomes a joy. And then we don't become afraid. And then we keep pushing ourselves to grow and try new things.
Wow. Yes. It's like,
I'm
wow.
looking at the beautiful
Oh,
painting behind you, and now I just want to try a really big landscape because I've never done that.
yeah, it's insane. Just
Yeah.
it's and again that brings to the point of like there's inspiration everywhere. If
Yes.
it's specifically if it's a type of inspiration that caters to your vision as well, which is
Yes.
important. But totally, totally. Wow. Wow. I
Great
wanna pick up some
questions.
paintings now. Thank you. Pick up some paints and get to painting. But yeah, so since you mentioned teaching quite a bit,
Yeah.
do you have any upcoming workshops that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, I do. So I do a regular, semi-regular, I'll explain it, online workshops. Is that, it started during COVID, of course, like everyone did, online workshops, but I have so many international students or students that, live in other places that have really enjoyed it. And so I still do that on occasion. Once in a while, I'll do like an Alla Prima online workshop. I don't have any of those scheduled just yet. I might do that in the winter, where I kind of replicate doing something like this, like that I do in, an Alla Prima head and shoulder portrait that I do in like a 4-day class. And, we kind of structure it the same. But what has evolved over the years, with the input of students, is they wanted to see me work on my gallery work. And they had a lot of the same questions that you asked me today. How do you start? How do you get inspiration? And, they just, and that's unfortunately, not taught in schools a lot. And I can see why, because it's so involved and it involves larger canvases and different things and a lot of thought process that goes into and strategizing. And, I've shared a lot of it today, but so I realized online I could share that. I could videotape myself as I'm working on studio paintings and videotape certain parts of the paintings and help them work on different paintings. And some of the people in my classes are working on giant paintings, some small, like some do head studies, some do multi-figurative portraits, portrait in a landscape. There's, it's up to them, whatever they want to do. And I help them strategize, from helping them edit their photographs and then meeting, either once a week, every other week, or once a month. And this is why I say it's regular, because I fit it around my travel and my whatever exhibitions I'm working on each year. All those dates change, right? So like I'm going to do one in July and August. It's already full right now, but I'm doing one in July and August because I have that time in the studio that I can share
Mhm.
that. And then, or yeah, August, September, and part of October, I'm traveling and going to different exhibitions and different things like that. And so I'm not in the studio. And then I might pick it up again in the winter. And I just usually let people know. And, it fills up fast online, but I just let them know like maybe a month or two before I'm going to do it. So if you're interested in that, just keep an eye on my website. I post things on there. I do have an in-person Alla Prima workshop that I think still might have a spot or two just because I just put it up online. And that's going to be in Cape Cod in September, mid-September. And that's at the Chatham Creative Arts Center. There's a link to it, again, on my workshops page. And then I've added a few for next year that I'm very excited about. One is at the Booth Art Academy that's adjacent to the Booth Art Museum. I think that one's full already. It's in February, if I remember correctly. Um, I look at the dates when I get closer to it. It's all online. But I'm very excited to say I have three in Africa next year. And I've taught in Africa before. This workshop's a little different because it's the guide is a professional photographer, and he's going to teach some photography and photo settings for people to get their best reference while we're on safari. And then I'm going to be painting in between safaris and guiding students with painting and keeping the class really small. It's 12 people maximum. That even includes plus one people that come, like a spouse. So it's like it might be 8 to 10 artists probably. And so I can really work one-on-one with people. We're going to be painting indigenous models in the different areas. We're going to 3 different areas I've never been to before. One is I have 2 in May next year, and again, all that you can see the whole itinerary on my website. One is in Zambia, Africa, the country of Zambia, and each of them have unique regions. In Zambia, it's by the Zambezi River, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and beautiful forests by a river. Again, it's a mix of gathering photo reference for wildlife, landscape, figure in the landscape, portrait. I'll paint a portrait. I'll paint also, a person standing outside in the landscape. We'll do some landscapes. I'm going to do some wildlife sketching, sketchbook on safari. And I really want to teach myself, it'll be mostly oil, but I really want to kind of teach myself some watercolor and gouache before then to actually take sketchbooks on the safari vehicle. So that's the goal. So I'm saying it publicly, so I have to be accountable. So maybe I'll teach that as well. It's not in the itinerary, but I got to learn it first. But, it's charcoal sketching and stuff, because I feel that's so valuable to sketch, whether it's wildlife or people from life, just quick sketches. And so that's kind of the format for all of them. But yeah, one is in Zambia. The other one is in Sabi-Sans, which is near Kruger National Park. And so that's where you can see all the big five, animals. And then the other one, which I'm really excited about, is in September. And it's in the Serengeti in Tanzania. So the Serengeti is where they have the big Great Migration that happens, every year, and, all the herd animals. And it's, that one's a little bit more for the adventurous in spirit, because, we take a small plane into the bush. We're going to stay at 2 different camps. They're mobile camps. I mean, they have their own bathroom, hot water. It's, like still, hot food, but it's mobile camps. And it's a little bit more like, you're stepping back in time and experiencing that. And, they are filling up fast. There's just a, couple rooms left in each. And so, yeah, so that's what I have scheduled for next year.
That's so exciting. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I've just
Oh
fallen in
man.
love with going to Africa. I mean, it just really felt like one of the, you know, purest, most authentic elemental places that I've been. And I'd always wanted to do wildlife, but I had never, ever since I was a little girl, one of the first things I drew was animals. And I, had went to zoos and taken pictures, but I feel like you see, it's not an animal in its true nature. And I never wanted to really paint animals in captivity, and being out in the real area is just it's just intoxicating, and just really centering, and I feel puts my soul into an alignment so strongly, being in this untouched land with animals that are not in captivity, so they're not hostile towards you. They're, very curious, and it's safe. It's very safe, much
Mm,
safer than I realized, being there, because they haven't been treated bad by a human, so they don't see us as predator or prey,
mm, mm,
not on their food chain, so to speak. And so felt very safe and very like just as it was meant to be, us existing with animals. And the people I met there that live there have such a joy and a peace and radiate a warmth that is unlike anything I've ever experienced. I mean, I experienced that in different places, but the amount of people that I've met from villages and such that radiate that is just um, it's really hard to put into words, which is why I want to paint
yeah.
it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and every time you've mentioned your Africa workshops, I'm always like, that is so intriguing. That sounds magical because, like you said, it's like a different perspective of how humankind and animals still belong to the same earth and we still share and inhabit the same areas. And it's easy to forget that when you live in, very human zones and you kind of forget about all the other little creatures that are involved in the cycle of life, and it's nice to reconnect with that.
And
Yeah.
that's something that's so unique to that area and going on safari, because I mean, I've been doing destination workshops for a long time. I think, since like 2012, where I did Italy and France. And, we did it kind of the same, where it was like over a week or 10 days. And, we're going and seeing sites and experiencing the culture, or doing wine tastings at a winery, and painting in between. And, so it's really trying to immerse ourselves in these cultural experiences. And I've always worked with someone who's from that area. My very first time in Italy with my friend Sarah Calgano, who's a wonderful artist that teaches out there, she wanted to study with me and brought me out there. And then we kind of developed this itinerary of like going to places that the locals know about and experiencing that, and then bringing that into our painting and painting local indigenous people there as well. And but with Africa, you bring the animals into it as well, and so it's just like another step too. And so it's so beautiful. And I try to, whether I'm teaching or just traveling on my own, I think just advice to artists out there that want to kind of pursue getting that wide breadth of subject matter in their own work is, whenever I travel somewhere, I try to give myself a couple extra days, even if it's for work or something, And for those artists who might be transitioning from a full-time job to doing art, if your work is sending you somewhere, can you take an extra couple days before or after and go around and see, where the locals are, and paint some of the local scenery, and paint some of the local, models, that are native and indigenous to that area, and just that they live there. I always try to, like when I was in Italy, paint local Italian people that have lived there, and their families have been there for a long time. And then you hear stories about life that you wouldn't hear as a tourist. And I just did that in Alaska in a workshop. We had a native woman who's UPIC model for us, and she's over 80 years old. She didn't even know her actual birthday. And it was such an honor that she started telling stories to my students from her tribe's people. And she said, these are things we don't normally tell to tourists and people that are just visiting. But she said she loved that our intention of wanting to create art and to honor her heritage. And she's like, I want to share with you. And she shared with us of going hunting for the first time, or the first time she was taken out on a date in the tundra with the, herds of, wildlife running by, and things of like just stories from their culture. And that was just so beautiful. But that's something you can do even not in a class, on your own as an artist when you're traveling around, because that makes that experience of whatever place you're visiting so rich, to know the history and the people. And that's something then you can imbue into your paintings, and it makes your paintings um, have an authentic ring to it, rather than just painting something because it looks pretty. I always want there to be a more of an understanding of what I'm painting, going into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see it. You can see it in the work too, which
Oh,
of course is
thank you.
absolutely beautiful. Yeah, of course.
There's so many more paintings I want to do.
Oh,
Like I'm just
yes.
like touching the edge of it. But
Yeah, so many paintings, so little time.
yes, that's why I
Oh,
hate
thank
going to
you.
sleep.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for this wonderful conversation. I'm gonna be thinking about it for probably months, if not years.
Oh, thank you, Laura. It was so great to talk to you and get to know you
Yeah.
more too. And I could just talk to you for hours and
Oh
hours.
yeah. Yeah, we can totally continue our conversations off the podcast as well. But yeah, but thank you
I'm sorry
so
it took
much.
us a long time to get together, but I'm glad
Oh,
we
it was
finally
worth
did it.
it.
It was
It was
perfect.
worth the wait.
It was excellent. Not
Yes, it
perfect.
was
Excellent.
excellent. Exactly.
Wonderful.
Oh man. Yeah.